My name is Anne. I'm sitting in my daughter Lily's school assembly, watching her speak bravely about her experience of being hurt by family. Pride fills my chest, but memories of the past flood back, and I'm drawn into a painful recollection. It all started 5 years ago on Lily's 10th birthday. Lily was our little sunshine, a bright and curious girl. My husband, Mark, and I had planned a wonderful party for her. Our home was filled with the sweet smell of vanilla frosting and melted candles. Balloons were almost touching the ceiling, and the laughter of kids chasing each other between the living room and the backyard echoed through the house. Mark's mother, Mrs. Thompson, was present at the party. She came from an old-fashioned family with strong beliefs. She was a rather strict and uptight woman. She sat stiffly on the couch, her hands neatly folded around a nicely wrapped box, observing everything with a cold smile. When it was time for gifts, Lily, being the well-mannered girl she was, saved her grandmother's present for last. The box was wrapped in pale blue paper with a silver ribbon. As she opened it, there was a small, colorful, cosmetic-looking kit inside, the kind usually marketed for kids. Before I could even ask about it, Lily gasped. She rubbed her eyes frantically, blinking hard, and then let out a scream that sent shivers down my spine. "Mom, my eyes! I can't see anything!" she cried, clawing at her face as tears streamed down. The box was knocked over in her panic. Mark rushed over immediately, picking her up in his arms. The room fell silent. Mrs. Thompson stood up so quickly that her chair scraped the floor. Lily kept sobbing, saying that everything was dark and it burned. Without hesitation, Mark grabbed the car keys and rushed out with Lily still screaming in his arms. I stood there, shaking, looking at the spilled contents of the gift. There were tiny bottles with glittery labels, and a sharp chemical smell filled the air. Mrs. Thompson mumbled that it must be an allergy. But deep down, I knew this wasn't an allergy. Something was seriously wrong. After they left, I locked myself in the bathroom and broke down. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, seeing Lily's hands covering her eyes. Little did I know that this birthday would tear our family apart. The hours passed painfully slow. I cleaned up the party in a daze, answering worried messages from the parents of the kids who'd been at the party. Close to midnight, my phone finally rang. It was Mark. His voice was flat and distant. He said the doctors were running tests and that Lily's eyes were badly irritated, maybe burned. When I asked if she could see, there was a long, painful pause. Then he said, "Not yet." After hanging up, I went back to the living room and stared at the gift box. I put on gloves and carefully gathered everything into a plastic bag. The labels on the bottles were in tiny print, and they were brands I'd never heard of. One bottle didn't even have a label. The smell was so strong that it made my eyes sting. I thought about Mrs. Thompson. She had insisted on choosing the gift herself. She had also made several comments before about how kids these days were too sensitive. Ugly memories started to stack up in my mind. When morning came, Mark returned home alone. He avoided my eyes. He told me that the doctors believed a chemical had gotten into Lily's eyes, something strong enough to temporarily blind her. They were keeping her in the hospital overnight. I demanded to know how this could happen with a toy-like gift. He finally looked at the bag on the table and turned pale. When I told him where I got it from, he took a deep breath and said he needed to go outside for a moment. When he came back, he wasn't alone. 2 police officers followed him into our house. The sight of the police made my knees weak. They asked me about the gift, about Mrs. Thompson, and what I'd witnessed. Mark just stood there like a stranger. In that moment, I realized this was far more than just an accident. The officers photographed the gift and sealed it as evidence. They asked if there had been any conflicts between Mrs. Thompson and me. I answered carefully, my voice trembling. I admitted that we'd had arguments and she'd said cruel things, but I'd never thought she'd hurt a child. After the officers left, Mark finally spoke. He said the hospital had called the police because the injury didn't seem accidental. A toxicology test had shown that the chemicals were industrial grade, not from children's makeup. I felt sick to my stomach. He also said that his mother had been questioned at the hospital and had given inconsistent answers about where she bought the gift. He told me she was likely to be arrested. I expected Mark to be furious, but he looked completely broken. I drove to the hospital and sat beside Lily's bed. Watching the bandages over her eyes rise and fall with her breathing, my heart ached. When she asked if she'd ever see again, I lied and said, yes, of course. Inside, I was in so much pain. The doctors explained that the damage might heal, but there were no guarantees. They also asked if anyone could have done this on purpose. I thought of Mrs. Thompson's cold smile. Later, when the police called to say she'd been taken into custody, I felt no relief, only a deep sense of grief. I knew this was just the beginning of something much darker. News spread quickly among our relatives. Some of them offered support, while others accused me of exaggerating. Mrs. Thompson's sister left a voicemail saying that I'd always hated her and finally found a way to destroy the family. Mark withdrew from me, spending hours on the phone with lawyers and detectives. When he talked to me, he was so careful with his words, as if he was afraid that any wrong word would cause an explosion. The police found receipts showing that Mrs. Thompson had bought cleaning solvents weeks earlier. Surveillance footage also showed her buying empty cosmetic containers. It became clear that she had planned this. But the question of why was harder to answer. The psychologist assigned to Lily said that sometimes grandparents project their resentment onto grandchildren when they see them as an extension of a disliked parent. That statement cut me like a knife. At night, I'd lie awake listening to Mark pacing in the room. I wondered if our marriage could survive this. One night, Mark finally sat beside me and said that he believed me now, that he believed his mother had done this. But I didn't feel victorious. I just felt empty. On the third day, Lily began to see shadows. The doctor said it was a good sign. I cried in the hallway until I couldn't stand anymore. Court dates came quickly. The prosecutor asked me to testify about my relationship with Mrs. Thompson, about the past threats hidden in her so-called jokes. Sitting on the witness stand, I felt so exposed, like all our private arguments were being put under a magnifying glass. Mrs. Thompson stared at me with hatred in her eyes, showing no remorse. She claimed it was an accident, that she'd mixed things up and just wanted to give Lily something special. But the jury saw through her lies. The chemical analysis proved everything. Lily, wearing dark glasses, held my hand as she testified via video, describing the burning pain and the fear. I watched as the jurors wiped away their tears. Mark also testified, his voice cracking as he admitted that he'd ignored the warning signs for years. When the verdict came back guilty, the whole room seemed to let out a sigh. Mrs. Thompson was sentenced to prison. As she was being led away, she shouted that this wasn't over. And I believed her. Life after the trial was quieter but carried a heavy burden. Lily's vision slowly improved, but she would always be sensitive to light. Birthdays became low-key affairs. Trust within our family was fragile. Mark and I started going to counseling, trying to repair the damage that had been done. Sometimes, Mark would wake up crying, mourning the mother he thought he had. I grieved too, for the grandmother Lily lost and the innocence she could never get back. One evening, a letter came from prison. Mark read it and tore it up. He said it was full of blame and no apology. That was the moment he finally let go. As the years passed, Lily grew stronger and braver. She learned to tell her story without getting scared. She said she wanted to help other kids who'd been hurt by their family. Today, on her 15th birthday, I gave her a simple gift, a necklace with a tiny eye charm. She smiled and said it reminded her to see clearly, not just with her eyes. I hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar smell of cake and candles. The past was still a part of us, but it no longer controlled us. I realized that what happened after the police came wasn't just about seeking justice. It was about our survival.